The bell cut through the droning silence of the school corridor. A second later, the classroom doors swung open, releasing a noisy stream of teenagers. Vanity Gold stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the familiar chaos of the beginning of recess. 32 years old, she still felt uncomfortable in these hallways, even though she was in her 7th year of teaching literature. "Miss Gold, may I ask a question about homework?" The thin voice of Abigail, the shy girl in the front desk, brought Vanity out of her reverie. "Of course, Abby," Vanity smiled, adjusting her thin-rimmed glasses. "What's bothering you?" While they were discussing The Great Gatsby, Vanity caught a glimpse of Principal Harrison talking to her parents in the hallway, occasionally squinting in her direction. She knew those looks. After attending the school picnic with Zoe for the first time last month, those looks had become habitual. "Thank you, Miss Gold," Abby brightened, gathering her textbooks. "You're welcome." Vanity squeezed the girl's shoulder encouragingly. As the last students left the classroom, Vanity began to gather her things. Lunch in the teacher's lounge was always an ordeal. Polite smiles, interrupted conversations at her appearance, awkward pauses. Vanity! Gloria Peterson, the biology teacher, the only one who still spoke to her the way she did. "Are you going to the cafeteria?" "I think I'll eat here." Vanity pulled out a container of salad. "I need to check my 11th grade essay." Gloria nodded understandingly. "Don't let them corner you, Van. You're the best literature teacher this school has had in the last 15 years. After she left, Vanity sighed, looking at the stack of unchecked papers. A notification flashed on her phone, a message from Zoe. "Hope your day is going better than mine. Love you." Vanity smiled. Even after 3 years of a relationship, those simple words warmed her heart. Ridgewood Clinic was in its usual hectic way for a Wednesday. Zoe Kincaid was finishing a patient's chart when she heard a muffled conversation behind the reception desk. "Did you see who has a 2 o'clock appointment with Dr. Montgomery?" whispered Denise, the new nurse. "The same teacher who lives with—" "Quiet!" Susan cut her off, casting a wary glance in Zoe's direction. Zoe pretended not to hear, staring intently at the monitor. 35 years old, an experienced nurse with a reputation for professionalism, but still the object of whispers and leering glances. "Zoe, I have good news for you." Dr. Ramirez approached her, leafing through some paperwork. "Your application for advanced training has been approved." "Really?" Her eyes widened in surprise. She had been trying to get this referral for the 2nd year. "Absolutely," he smiled. "You've earned it. It starts next month, Portland." "Thank you, Dr. Ramirez." Zoe couldn't hide her joy. This was a chance to not only upgrade her skills, but possibly find a job in a bigger city. During her lunch break, she stepped out onto the clinic's patio. Heavy clouds covered the sky, promising rain by evening. Zoe typed a short message to Vanity and sent it, hoping to brighten her day at least a little. Toward the end of her shift, an incident occurred that threw Zoe off balance. An elderly patient, Mr. Ellison, whom she was preparing for a procedure, suddenly refused. "I need another nurse." "Is something wrong, Mr. Ellison?" Zoe asked with a professional smile. "Nothing's wrong, it's just—" He hesitated. "I've heard about you, about your lifestyle. My pastor says—" "I'll get Susan," Zoe interrupted him, keeping her expression neutral. As she left the room, she took a deep breath, holding back her emotions. By 6 p.m., having finished her shift, Zoe walked out into the parking lot in the drizzling rain. Just another day in Ridgewood, she thought, as she started the 12-year-old Ford. The small white house on Maple Street was the only place where Vanity and Zoe could be themselves. Vanity arrived first and started cooking dinner, turning on her favorite jazz album. When the front door slammed, she felt a familiar rush of joy. "It smells divine." Zoe hugged her from behind, nuzzling her nose into her neck. "Pasta with mushrooms and chicken." Vanity turned and kissed Zoe. "How was your day?" They ate dinner on the small veranda, despite the chilly evening, talking to each other about the day. Zoe mentioned the course in Portland, but didn't mention the incident with the patient. "Maybe it's a sign," Vanity said thoughtfully. "A reason to think about moving? To a big city where no one would know our story?" Zoe shook her head. "Running away isn't a solution. It's not running away, it's finding a place where we can just live." Vanity stood up, picking up the plates. I'm getting tired of being a local landmark. Later, as they settled into the living room with their books, Zoe contemplated Vanity's profile in the light of the table lamp. These quiet evenings were their treasure, but even here in their sanctuary, it still felt as if the outside world was always watching, always judging. Merritt called, Vanity said, keeping her eyes on the book. She's inviting us to a barbecue on Sunday. Who else is coming? Just us and her, Vanity smiled. And maybe that new librarian, Adrian. Zoe grinned. Merritt and her endless attempts at dating. She just wants everyone to have the same happy life she and Robert have. Or just to widen the circle of people who accept us, Zoe added quietly. The Ridgewood City Library was housed in an old red brick building. Merritt Lawson, the head librarian, was finishing arranging the books when she heard a familiar voice. Good afternoon, Miss Know-It-All. Vanity stood at the counter with a small stack of books. When? I wasn't expecting you today. Merritt brightened. In her 38, Merritt was that rare soul who seemed to have found her perfect corner of the world. A happy marriage, a job she loved, and a total lack of interest in gossip and prejudice. We should return the books and pick up something new. Vanity put the stack on the counter. How's Robert? Still obsessed with his new boat? Merritt rolled her eyes. So you're coming on Sunday? They talked for almost an hour, moving from books to city news as the library slowly emptied. When the last visitor left, Merritt lowered her voice. How are you both? I've heard talk. Vanity sighed. It's business as usual. The headmaster walks around, hesitant to speak directly. The parents are whispering. Zoe's facing the same thing at the clinic. I'm sorry you're going through this. Merritt squeezed her friend's hand. You know what the most absurd thing is? All these people who are judging you, they're trusting you with their children and their health. That's what Ridgewood is all about. Vanity grinned bitterly. A small town with big prejudices. When Vanity left, Merritt watched her thoughtfully. She had known Vanity before she met Zoe, had seen how her friend had changed, becoming happier and more confident. And now she was watching this small town slowly destroy their happiness. The patrol car drove leisurely through the quiet streets of Ridgewood. Detective Alexis Reed stared out the window at the flashing houses lit by the setting sun. The most boring patrol of the year, her partner, Detective Ashton Palmer, muttered, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Enjoy the peace, Ash, Alexis said. After that case in Oakville, I'm all for peace and quiet. Alexis Reed was an experienced detective in her 40s, transferred to Ridgewood from Portland 3 years ago. Ashton, a native of the town, had been skeptical of his partner from the big city at first, but over time their cooperation had become effective. By the way, Palmer turned onto Elm Street, did you hear about the middle school teacher? Lives with the nurse from the clinic. Alexis gave him a tired look. So? Nothing, just saying, he shrugged. My daughter's in her class. Good teacher, by the way. Then what difference does it make who she lives with? Alexis turned away from the window. The radio transmitter came on. All patrol officers. Report of a disturbance at the Oak Street supermarket. Finally something. Palmer turned the car around. At the supermarket, they found an elderly woman accusing the cashier of cheating. While Palmer talked to the manager, Alexis calmed the angry Mrs. Caldwell. I know everyone in this town, Detective, the old woman said, shaking the check. And I'll tell you, there's something fishy going on here. First, these women living together openly. Now I'm being cheated out of $2.50. Alexis sighed mentally. Typical small town, all the problems jumbled into one ball. After checking the receipt and making sure there was no mistake, she patiently explained the situation to Mrs. Caldwell. When they got back to the patrol car, Palmer hummed. Did you see that? It's all in a bunch. The check and the teacher and the nurse. To someone like Mrs. Caldwell, they're links in the same chain of moral decay. You know, Ash, sometimes I miss the anonymity of the big city. Alexis glanced at the dark storefronts. No one cares who lives with who. It has the lowest crime rate in the county, Palmer said. Yes, Alexis replied thoughtfully. The question is at what cost? When darkness fell, they finished their patrol and returned to the station. Filling out the report, Alexis thought about how thin the line between public order and personal freedom was in a place like Ridgewood, a town where everyone knows everyone can be both a refuge and a cage at the same time. Thursday morning greeted Vanity Gold with a chill and low clouds. She arrived at school earlier than usual. She had to get the office ready for an open class. There was a ringing silence in the hallways, broken only by the resounding echo of her footsteps. Stopping at her locker in the teacher's lounge, Vanity dialed the combination and opened the door. A quadruple folded piece of paper fell out of the locker. She machine-picked it up and unfolded it. "We don't want our children learning from people like you. Leave Ridgewood." The handwriting was deliberately misshapen, the letters written with an obviously unsteady hand. Vanity felt a lump rise in her throat. It was the third such note in the last 2 weeks. The first she'd found between the pages of her day planner, the second on the windshield of her car. "Good morning, Vanity." Gloria Peterson's voice made her wince. "Did you see a ghost?" Vanity hastily folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. "It's good, Gloria. Just thinking about today's open class." "Oh, don't worry. Your classes are always great," Gloria smiled, pulling a stack of notebooks out of her locker. "By the way, are you going to the parent-teacher conference tonight?" Vanity stiffened. The parent-teacher conference. How could she forget? "Of course." She forced out a smile. "I'll be there." The day flew by in a flurry of classes, counseling, and meeting preparations. Vanity tried not to think about the note, but the words written on it wouldn't leave her mind. Who could have done this? A coworker? A parent? The maintenance staff? By 6 p.m., teachers and parents began to gather in the auditorium. Vanity took her seat in the third row, feeling the stares. Principal Harrison opened the assembly with a standard speech about the school's accomplishments, plans for the coming semester, and the need for cooperation between the school and families. "Now I would like to discuss an important issue that has been raised by some parents." The principal paused, and Vanity tensed inwardly. "The question of the moral character of our teachers." A whisper swept through the hall. Vanity felt the color flood her face. "School is not only a place of learning, but also an environment of values," Harrison continued. "It's natural for parents to be concerned about the example our teachers set." Mrs. Fleming, the mother of one of Vanity's top students, raised her hand. "I believe that the personal lives of teachers should remain their private business unless it affects the quality of teaching." "On the other hand," objected Mr. Barrows, the father of 7th grade twins, "children are impressionable. They see their teachers as role models. And if a teacher's lifestyle conflicts with traditional family values..." Vanity sat motionless, as if turned to stone. They talked about her without naming her, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Gloria suddenly raised her hand. "Are we here discussing abstract concepts or concrete people? If the latter, I should remind you that Vanity Gold is one of the best teachers in our school. Her students score top marks in their final exams. No one is disputing Miss Gold's professional qualities." The principal tried to smooth things over. "It's about general principles." The discussion continued for almost another hour. Vanity listened as they discussed her life, her choices, her right to be who she was. Some parents spoke in her defense. Others demanded action. The principal maneuvered between the extreme positions, taking neither side. When the meeting was over, Vanity quickly gathered her things and headed for the exit, avoiding the stares of her co-workers and parents. In the parking lot, Gloria caught up with her. "Van, don't take it personally. Burroughs and his company are a conservative minority. Most parents support you." "Thank you, Gloria." Vanity smiled weakly. "But you heard Harrison. He's ready to throw me under the bus if the pressure builds." "Don't give up." Gloria squeezed her hand. "Ridgewood isn't so bad. People change." Getting into the car, Vanity pulled out her phone and texted Zoe. "The meeting was awful. We'll talk at home." At the Ridgewood Clinic, Thursday was Preventive Care Day. Zoe performed standard procedures, filled out charts, and tried to remain professionally calm despite the mounting tension. During her lunch break, she walked into the break room where several nurses were discussing the latest news. The conversation was momentarily cut short when she entered. "Don't dwell on the best part," Zoe said as she poured herself a coffee. "We were just talking about the new duty schedule," Denise replied quickly, not looking her in the eye. Zoe sat down at the table, opened a container of salad, and pretended to concentrate on her food. Gradually, the conversation resumed, but now on a different topic. "Did you hear about the parent-teacher conference at the middle school?" Susan asked. "My sister says there's going to be a real storm there." "What's it about?" Denise asked. "Because of that literature teacher who lives with the—" Susan stopped talking, glancing at Zoe. "With me," Zoe finished calmly. "You can say it out loud, Susan. I live with Vanity Gold, and we love each other. It's not an infectious disease or a crime." There was a heavy silence in the room. Zoe gathered her things and walked out, feeling her hands shaking. Dr. Ramirez called out to her in the hallway. "Zoe, just a minute." She stopped, trying to pull herself together. "I heard part of the conversation," he said quietly. "And I want you to know that if anyone in the clinic makes you feel uncomfortable in your work environment, let me know. We will not tolerate discrimination." "Thank you, Dr. Ramirez." Zoe felt grateful. "But I'll be fine." The rest of the day passed in a tense routine. As Zoe was about to leave, she was stopped by Eleanor, the nurse who had worked at the clinic the longest. "I heard about your conflict in the break room," she said. "And I want to tell you something, Zoe. I've been here for 30 years. I've seen doctors, nurses, administrators come and go. And I can say with certainty, you're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. Don't let anyone make you feel any different." Zoe was touched to the core by these words. "Thank you, Eleanor. That means a lot to me." As she left the clinic, she saw the message from Vanity about the parent-teacher conference and felt everything inside her clench. It looked like it was going to be a tough day for both of them. The library was preparing to close when Vanity entered through the main entrance. When Merritt saw her friend, she knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked when the last customer had left. Vanity pulled a crumpled note out of her pocket and silently handed it to Merritt. She read it and turned pale. "Oh my God, Van, you have to tell the police! It's a threat!" "What will they do?" Vanity grinned bitterly. "It's not even a direct threat. It's just a wish." Merritt led her friend into her office and closed the door. They sat down at a small window overlooking the quiet street. "Listen, Van, maybe you and Zoe should really think about moving," Merritt said cautiously. "Not out of fear, but for your peace of mind. Portland isn't that far away. You could get a job at a good school. Zoe could get a job at a hospital." Vanity looked at the falling leaves outside the window. "Zoe and I have talked about this. She doesn't think running away is the solution." "It's not running away," Merritt objected softly. "It's finding a place where you can be happy." "And you?" Vanity looked at her friend. "We don't want to lose you." "Oh, honey," Merritt smiled. "Portland is 2 hours away. I'll be coming so often that you'll get tired of me." They talked for another hour or so. Merritt talked about vacancies in Portland schools, about neighborhoods where they could rent a good apartment. Vanity felt some of the heaviness that had been weighing on her all day gradually recede. "By the way," Merritt said as they were about to leave, "Robert and I have decided to have a little party at the Bluebird tonight. It's nothing fancy, just to hang out with friends. You and Zoe should come." "I'm not sure it's the right day." "That's exactly why you should come," Merritt insisted. "Surround yourself with people who love you. Besides, Adrian will be there. Remember the new librarian? He's from San Francisco, and you might have a lot in common." Vanity hesitated, but Merritt's firm gaze left no choice. "Okay, I'll talk to Zoe. I'll talk." Detectives Reed and Palmer had finished their shift and were about to go home when a worried middle-aged woman entered the station. "What can I do for you?" Alexis asked, noticing her confused look. "I'd like to report a—" The woman hesitated about a possible threat. Alexis led her into the interview room and introduced herself. "Detective Alexis Reed. And you are?" "Gloria Peterson, biology teacher at Ridgewood High School." "What's the threat that's bothering you, Miss Peterson?" Gloria clenched her fingers nervously. "Not to me. It's my colleague, Vanity Gold. She found an anonymous note demanding she leave town, and it wasn't the first." Alexis frowned. "Vanity Gold, the literature teacher?" "Yes," Gloria nodded. "You've probably heard of her. She lives with a nurse from the clinic, Zoe Kincaid, and because of that, because of their relationship, some of the town's residents are very aggressive." Alexis wrote down the basic facts and asked, "Did Miss Gold go to the police herself?" No, she doesn't believe the police will take it seriously. I see. Alexis closed her notebook. Thank you for letting me know. I'll talk to Miss Gold. When Gloria left, Palmer came into the room. What is it? Possible threats against that teacher you mentioned. Vanity Gold. Palmer whistled. Really? Who would have thought? Ridgewood always seemed like such a peaceful town. On the surface, Alexis said thoughtfully. But beneath that surface, the Bluebird Cafe was located in the heart of Ridgewood and was a favorite meeting place for the local intelligentsia. When Vanity and Zoe walked in, Merritt and her husband and a young man Vanity didn't know were waiting for them at a table by the window. You've come! Merritt was happy, jumping up from her seat. This is Adrian Foster, our new rare edition specialist. Adrian turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist with a subtle sense of humor. He recently moved from San Francisco and has yet to fully settle in Ridgewood. What brings you to our quiet little town? Zoe asked, sipping her wine. My parents, Adrian smiled. They're getting older, and I wanted to be closer to them. Besides, after the turmoil of the big city, Ridgewood seems like an idyll. Every idyll has its dark side, Vanity said. The conversation flowed casually, moving from books to movies, from politics to local news. Vanity slowly relaxed, feeling supported by this small circle of friends. Suddenly, the door of the cafe opened and Detectives Reed and Palmer walked in. They took a table at the other end of the room, but Alexis spotted Vanity and, after a brief hesitation, made her way to their table. Good evening, she nodded to everyone present. Miss Gold, may I speak with you for a moment? Vanity looked at the detective in surprise. Sure. They stepped back to the bar. Alexis introduced herself and asked without preamble, Miss Gold, have you received any anonymous threatening notes? Vanity stiffened. How do you know? Your colleague, Gloria Peterson, contacted the station this evening. She's concerned for your safety. Gloria. Vanity didn't know whether to thank her friend or be angry at her for interfering. Did you still have those notes? Vanity nodded. 2 of the 3. I threw the first one away without giving it much thought. I'll need to look at them, Alexis said. And I'll need to take your statements. When would it be convenient for you to come by the station? I can bring them by tomorrow after school. Great. Alexis handed her a business card. If there are any new notes or anything suspicious, call me directly. Anytime. When Vanity returned to the table, Zoe looked at her questioningly. Is everything okay? What did the detective want to talk about? I'll tell you at home, Vanity replied quietly, glancing at Merritt. It's about the notes. The rest of the evening passed in casual conversation, though Vanity felt uneasy as she watched the detectives sitting at the far table. Something about Alexis Reed's calm confidence inspired confidence, but the situation itself, the police, the threats, made her heart beat faster. By 10 o'clock that evening, the company began to pack up to go home. Adrian said goodbye first, followed by Robert and Merritt. Would you like us to give you a ride? Robert offered. Thank you, but we need to walk, Zoe replied. It had been a busy day. The detectives had left by then. Vanity and Zoe walked out of the cafe into the cool fall night. The streets of Ridgewood were almost empty, with only the occasional passerby hurrying about their business. So what did the detective want? Zoe asked as they walked away from the cafe. Vanity recounted Gloria's visit to the police and her conversation with Alexis. I don't know if I should make such a big deal out of it, she finished. They're just silly notes. Don't minimize it, Van. Zoe took her hand. They're threats, and they need to be taken seriously. They walked down the quiet streets, past neat houses with warm lights in the windows. Their path lay through a small park, the usual route they often took to get home. You know, Vanity said as they entered the park, I was talking to Merritt today about Portland. Maybe we should really think about moving. Zoe stopped and turned to her. Are you serious? After today's meeting, those notes, I'm not sure Ridgewood will ever accept us. Van, we can't let them kick us out. Zoe's voice was determined. This is our home, our life. But at what cost, Zoe? The constant stress, the feeling that we're being watched, judged. Their conversation was interrupted by a strange sound, the crunching of twigs somewhere in the bushes. Zoe tensed. Did you hear it? Probably a cat or a squirrel, Vanity answered uncertainly. They quickened their steps, instinctively keeping closer to each other. The park, which seemed cozy and safe during the day, looked ominous at night. The shadows of the trees, swayed by the wind, created bizarre patterns on the paths. "We're almost there," Zoe said, pointing to the visible exit from the park ahead. "Just a couple more minutes." Vanity stopped suddenly. "Wait, I think I dropped something. My scarf." She turned around, peering into the darkness. Zoe pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. "Let's take a look." They walked slowly back down the path, shining the flashlight on the ground. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared from behind the trees. "Who's there?" Zoe asked sharply, pointing the light in that direction. The figure froze for a moment and then quickly disappeared into the bushes. "Zoe, let's get out of here," Vanity whispered, grabbing her hand. They ran toward the exit of the park. They heard quick footsteps behind them. "Don't look back, just keep walking." Zoe gripped Vanity's hand tighter. The exit was very close, just a few more meters to the lighted street, to safety. "Zoe!" Vanity suddenly shrieked, and her hand slipped out of Zoe's. Looking around, Zoe saw only darkness and heard the muffled sound of a struggle. "Vanity!" she shouted, rushing back into the darkness of the park. Friday morning greeted Ridgewood with the shrill howl of a police siren. Detective Alexis Reed stood by the yellow tape enclosing the crime scene in the park. Vanity Gold's body was discovered by a morning jogger at 6:30. Preliminary reports indicate death was from strangulation between 10 and 11 o'clock that evening. "What have we got?" Palmer asked, approaching his partner. "Strangulation. Signs of a struggle. No witnesses." Alexis looked at the covered body. "And talking to her yesterday was probably the last chance to prevent it." Palmer sighed heavily. "Don't blame yourself. We couldn't have known the threats would materialize so soon." Screams could be heard in the distance. 2 police officers were holding back a sobbing Zoe Kincaid as she tried to break through the cordon. "Let me go!" she screamed. "I have to see her!" Alexis walked toward her. "Miss Kincaid, please calm down. You can't go through. This is a crime scene." "This is my fault." Zoe collapsed to her knees. I let go of her hand. For a second. Just for a second. "Were you here last night?" Alexis helped her up. "We were on our way back from the Bluebird Cafe." Zoe struggled to speak through her tears. "Someone was following us in the park. Vanity stopped to look for a scarf and, I lost her in the dark." Alexis nodded to the officer. "Take Miss Kincaid to the station. I'll be there shortly." Palmer approached as the police car with Zoe was pulling away. "We need to canvass the cafe, find out who else was there last night. And we're going to need those threatening notes," Alexis added. "We start with the fact that there was obvious tension between the victim and someone local. The motive is probably related to her sexual orientation." Palmer frowned. "Don't jump to conclusions, Lex. It could be anything. A robbery, a random attack." "In Ridgewood?" Alexis raised an eyebrow skeptically. "When was the last time we had a random murder?" An hour later, they were at the station. Zoe Kincaid sat in the interrogation room, pale, eyes red with tears. An untouched cup of coffee stood in front of her. "Miss Kincaid," Alexis began softly, "we need to know everything about last night. Every detail, even if it seems insignificant to you." Zoe began to recount in a broken voice. The night at the cafe, the meeting with her friends, the conversation with Detective Reed, the walk home through the park. "Someone was following us," she repeated. "I heard footsteps, saw a shadow, but I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just another passerby." "Were there a lot of people in the cafe?" Palmer asked. "Just a normal Friday night. A few regulars, a couple new faces." "Did you notice anyone who took a particular interest in you or Miss Gold? Maybe following you around?" Zoe shook her head. "No, but—" She fell silent. "But?" Alexis rushed her. "As we were leaving, I noticed a car. A dark sedan parked across the street from the cafe. Someone was sitting in it. Did you get the license plate number? The make?" "No, it was dark. Just a big, dark sedan. Miss Kincaid, we need those threatening notes that Vanity received. Do you know where they are?" "In the top drawer of the desk in our house," Zoe cried again. "I told her to take them seriously." Vanity and Zoe's house was quiet and empty. Alexis looked around the rooms while Palmer searched for notes in the study. On the mantelpiece were pictures. Vanity and Zoe at the beach, in the park, with friends. Happy faces, carefree smiles. Found it. Palmer came out of the study with 2 folded sheets of paper in a plastic bag. These are definitely threats. They returned to the station, where an officer informed them that the witnesses from the cafe were waiting. The first was Merritt Lawson, pale and shaken. "I can't believe it," she repeated. "Vanity, it's impossible." "Miss Lawson," Alexis tried to speak calmly, "tell me about last night. Who was in the cafeteria? Did you notice anything unusual?" "My husband and I, Vanity and Zoe, Adrian Foster, the new librarian. The evening was, ordinary. We talked, we laughed, then you and your partner showed up." "Who else was in the cafe?" Palmer asked. Merritt thought for a moment. "Mrs. Wilson, the math teacher, a few high school students, Mr. Barrows and his wife." "Burrows?" Alexis asked. "The one who spoke against Vanity at the parent-teacher conference?" "Yes." Merritt looked up. "He was sitting in the corner with his wife. And you know what's weird? When Vanity walked in, he defiantly turned away. And when you approached her, he watched you." Alexis and Palmer looked at each other. The next witness was the owner of the cafe, who confirmed Burrows' presence and mentioned that he had left the establishment shortly after Vanity and Zoe had left. By late afternoon, they had interviewed nearly 24 people. The picture of Vanity's last hours was slowly taking shape. However, no one saw the attacker or any suspicious persons in the park. "What do you think?" Palmer asked when they were alone in the study. "I think we need to talk to Burrows," Alexis pored over the tapes, "and check the security cameras around the cafe. If Zoe's right about the dark sedan—" "Lex," Palmer faltered, "didn't you always say not to jump to conclusions? Burrows may be a conservative bore, but that doesn't make him a killer. What about the threatening notes? And his behavior at the coffee shop?" Alexis was starting to get annoyed. "Ash, I know you're not crazy about, unconventional relationships, but that doesn't stop you from seeing the obvious, does it?" Palmer sighed. "I just want to be objective. There could have been a lot of people in the park last night. It could have been a robbery gone wrong." "Nothing was stolen," Alexis reminded him. "No purse, no phone, no jewelry. This was a targeted attack." Saturday brought the first forensic results and new witnesses. Burrows, called in for questioning, looked tense but confident. "Yes, I was in the cafe with my wife," he confirmed. "And yes, I've made no secret of the fact that I thought Miss Gold's presence at the school was inappropriate, but I never wished her dead." "Where were you between 10 o'clock and 11 p.m. Thursday night?" Alexis asked. "At home with my wife. After the cafe, we drove straight home." "In a car?" Palmer asked. "What kind of car do you drive, Mr. Burrows?" "A silver Toyota Camry. My wife can confirm my alibi." When Burrows left, Alexis looked disappointed. Her wife will confirm. Of course she will. "We have no reason to hold him," Palmer pointed out, "but we can check his car and request surveillance footage." Toward evening, we had a surprise visitor, Gloria Peterson, a colleague of Vanity's. "I remembered something," she began without preamble. "That night, after the PTA meeting, I saw Norman Prescott, our school security guard. He was talking to Burrows in the parking lot, very emotional." "Prescott?" Alexis frowned. "His name hadn't come up in the statement. He tends to keep a low profile," Gloria explained. "He's ex-military, been with us for about 5 years. Always been strange, especially with women." Palmer wrote down the name. "Thank you, Miss Peterson. We'll check it out." After she left, they ran a background check on Norman Prescott. Turns out he had a few priors for domestic violence 10 years ago, but not a single offense since. "What kind of car does he drive?" Alexis asked, looking at the file. Palmer checked the database. A black 2,000-year-old Ford Taurus. "Dark sedan," Alexis straightened up. "We need to find him now." Sunday morning, Alexis called Zoe. "Miss Kincaid, have you ever noticed the school security guard Norman Prescott taking a special interest in Vanity?" "Prescott?" Zoe's voice sounded surprised. "No, I don't recall. Although, wait. About a month ago, Vanity had mentioned that he was looking at her strangely, but she hadn't paid much attention to it." "One more thing," Alexis continued. "Would you recognize that dark sedan if you saw it again?" "Maybe," Zoe answered uncertainly. "It was old with faded paint. We'll send an officer over to show you some pictures." Palmer came into the office with the printouts. The camera at the traffic light outside the cafe recorded a black Ford at 2307, heading toward the park. And Prescott? He's not home. Neighbors say they haven't seen him since yesterday. Put out a bolo. Alexis started gathering paperwork. And get a search warrant for his house. Palmer hesitated. Lex, we still don't have much evidence. One car of a similar description. Ash, don't you see it or don't you want to see it? Alexis turned to him. Threats, dark sedan, criminal record, disappearing right after the murder. What more do you need? Okay, Palmer gave in. I'll get a warrant. At Prescott's house, they found newspaper clippings about Vanity and Zoe, a city map with a marked route from the cafe to the park, and most importantly, Vanity's scarf hidden under the mattress. God, Palmer whispered, looking at the evidence. He had really planned this. The question is why, Alexis said thoughtfully, and where he is now. The answer came 2 hours later. A patrol car found Prescott's Ford on a forest road 15 kilometers outside of town. Inside was Prescott himself, dead, with a bullet wound to the head and a gun in his hand. Suicide? Palmer suggested. Looks like it. Alexis examined the car. You find anything? A note in the glove compartment. The officer handed her a plastic bag with a piece of paper. Alexis read it aloud. I didn't mean to kill her, just to scare her, make her leave. She was a disgrace to our town, corrupting the children by her example. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. It was an accident. I'm sorry. Is the case closed? Palmer asked as they drove back to the station. Alexis was silent, staring out the window. I don't know, Ash. Something doesn't add up. What is it? We have threats, evidence, a confession, even the murder weapon. His hands. What else? I don't know, she said again. It's just a feeling. Monday morning, as the case was about to be closed, Adrian Foster, the new librarian, came into the station. Detective Reed? He looked nervous. There's something I need to tell you about the night at the cafe. Alexis led him into the office. Go ahead, Mr. Foster. When everyone else left, I stopped to pay, he began. I saw Burroughs talking to a man in the parking lot. I couldn't hear what he was talking about, but Burroughs was pointing in the direction where Vanity and Zoe had gone, and then he gave the man money. Can you describe this man? Tall, short hair, military build. I didn't see his face. Alexis straightened up. Prescott, why didn't you tell me about this before? Adrian lowered his eyes. I was afraid. Burroughs is a powerful man in town. Besides, I heard that the murderer had been found. Thank you, Mr. Foster. Alexis stood up. This is important information. As soon as Adrian left, she called Palmer. Ash, we need to talk to Burroughs again and check his financials. Any cash withdrawals in the last month. The second interview with Burroughs didn't go so smoothly. Faced with a witness statement and a $2,000 withdrawal from his account the day before the murder, he started to get nervous. I don't understand what I'm being accused of, his voice trembled. Yes, I talked to Prescott. Yes, I gave him money, but I only asked him to scare her, to make her think about moving. You hired a man with a history of violence to scare a woman, Alexis said coldly. What do you think could have happened? He should have just talked to her. Burroughs wiped the sweat from his forehead. Told her there'd be trouble if she didn't leave. That's all. And the notes? Palmer asked. Were they your work too? Burroughs was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, Yes, I wanted her to leave because of the children. My children mustn't think this way of life is normal. And for that, you were willing to intimidate her. Alexis shook her head. And when intimidation didn't work, you decided to take it further. No, Burroughs exclaimed. I never wanted her dead. Prescott was out of line. That's not what we agreed on. Palmer leaned toward him. Mr. Burroughs, you hire a former domestic abuser to intimidate a woman in a dark park, and you're surprised things didn't go according to plan. Yeah, Burroughs lowered his head. I didn't know about his past. You'll be arrested for accessory to murder. Alexis stood up. And believe me, the jury will not appreciate your concern for the moral fiber of the city. Vanity's funeral was held on Wednesday. Despite the rain, dozens of people showed up. Students, co-workers, friends. Zoe stood next to Merritt, silent tears rolling down her face. Alexis and Palmer watched from a distance. You know what the worst part is, Ash? Alexis said quietly. This could have happened anywhere. not just in a small town like Ridgewood. But everyone knows each other here, Palmer objected. It should be safer. It's an illusion. Knowing doesn't mean understanding or acceptance. After the ceremony, Zoe came up to them. Thank you for coming. Thank you for solving this case. We're sorry we couldn't prevent the tragedy, Alexis said sincerely. I'm leaving, Zoe said. To Portland. Vanity and I talked about it the other night. She wanted to leave, and I insisted that I stay and fight. It's not your fault, Palmer said softly. No one should have to fight for the right to just live. When Zoe left, Alexis looked at her partner in surprise. Ash, is this a new side of you? Palmer shrugged. Maybe I can learn from mistakes too. We all wear masks, Lex, sometimes even from ourselves. They walked to the car in the drizzling rain, leaving behind the cemetery and the silent group of people seeing off a woman whose greatest fault was that she dared to be herself in a world that wasn't ready for it. 2 weeks later, Alexis Reed sat in the Bluebird Cafe, perusing the morning paper. On page 3 was a small note about James Burrows' sentencing, 10 years for accessory to murder. The court recognized that although he had not planned Vanity's death, his actions had directly led to the tragedy. May I sit down? Merritt Lawson's voice brought her out of her reverie. Of course. Alexis set the paper aside. How are you? Trying to get on with my life. Merritt smiled weakly. I talked to Zoe yesterday. She got a job at the hospital in Portland. I'm glad to hear that. You know, Merritt looked out the window at the quiet Ridgewood Street. The worst part isn't what Prescott did. It's not even what Burrows organized. The scary thing is that many in the town secretly approve of them. Not the murder, of course, but, the idea that people like Vanity and Zoe don't belong here. Alexis was silent, pondering her words. But there are others, Merritt continued. Those who came to the funeral, the students who brought flowers to the school. People change, Detective Reed. Slowly, but they're changing. I hope you're right. Alexis finished her coffee. And I hope the cost of that change isn't too high. When she left the cafe, the street was quiet and peaceful. Ridgewood was getting back to normal, healing the wounds caused by the tragedy. But there were still shadows lurking beneath the peaceful surface, prejudices, fears, misunderstandings. And sometimes these shadows took on flesh, turning into monsters capable of taking the lives of those who dared to be different. But there were also rays of light, people ready to accept, to understand, to protect. And in this eternal struggle between light and shadow, perhaps one day the light will win, even if not today, but someday. Alexis wanted to believe that.